Cars, y'all. Sharing roads with cars is undeniably scary, even if you don't take aggressive drivers into account. It's one of the reasons more and more people are getting into mixed terrain bicycle touring and bikepacking.
But we can't avoid them all the time, so we thought we'd share the 5 biggest mistakes that cyclists, bike tourers, and bikepackers make while sharing the road with cars.
Plus, we'll share how to use a cheap children's toy to keep cars away from you while biking. Mistake number 1, not planning your route.
So the best way to stay safe from cars while traveling by bike is to avoid them. We cycled across Turkey in 2022, and on one of our first days we had to get to a bus stop, but the app we were using to navigate directed us into a chaotic cloverleaf highway, and we bailed.
We didn't know that we could actually set our mapping software to avoid busy roads, so we turned back into town and spent some time learning how to use our apps. And that evening we used some chill side roads to make it to our destination.
Many of the popular bike navigation apps such as Google Maps, OSM or Osman,
We don't know how to say it.
and Komoot can be set to prioritize quieter rural roads, bike paths, and gravel roads.
And the app cycle.travel, which we haven't actually used yet, but we've heard really good things, is specifically designed to find you quieter roads to ride your bike. We've seen one car. And of course, there's always single track, which comes with its own set of dangers.
So there's always a trade-off. Bike paths and single track are one thing, but if you're using the quiet country roads, sometimes you don't have enough of a shoulder to get away from passing traffic.
Hey, that was a little close. So while you might not see as many cars, you will probably be closer to them than if you were on a bigger road.
And that's why it's important to avoid.
Mistake number 2, being invisible. The U.S. National Highway Transportation Safety Administration says that one of the biggest causes of collisions with bikes and cars is the bikes not being visible. But unless you're Harry Potter, we think it has less to do with you being invisible and more to do with drivers not taking the time to look for bikes on the road.
But there are ways to be more visible in traffic. One of the most obvious ways to be more visible is to wear high-vis gear and use lights. Aside from running down your battery, there's no reason to not use your lights during the day.
And while there's conflicting information about whether or not wearing high-vis gear makes bikers seem less human to drivers, there's no research yet that says that drivers are more likely to actually hit people who are wearing fluorescent yellow or orange.
It's also important to avoid riding in a car's blind spot. If you pass a car on the right, you may be in their blind spot, and if they turn to the right, it could result in a collision. Avoid this by either staying behind cars in the line of traffic or making sure you are ahead of a car and have made eye contact with the driver, if possible.
And here's something that I am guilty of. If you're riding down a street and there's a bunch of cars parked on the side, I tend to want to get as far away from the cars that are moving down the street as possible, and so I end up weaving in and out of those parked cars. It makes me feel safer because I feel like I'm getting further away from the cars that are moving, but it can also make me disappear from view from the drivers sometimes. Plus, it makes me unpredictable, which is our 3rd mistake.
Did you know that you can be fined in Germany for not using the bike lane? Every country has different laws and regulations regarding bicyclists.
And it's a good idea to know what those laws are, if only because then you'll know what drivers expect of you.
Usually, regardless of where you are, if you're on your bike in traffic, you're considered a vehicle with all of the rights and responsibilities of a vehicle. And if you've dismounted your bike and you're walking with it, you are considered a pedestrian with all of the rights and responsibilities of a pedestrian. So that means when you transition from being a pedestrian to being a vehicle or weave on and off of sidewalks, it makes it much more difficult for vehicles to predict what you're going to do and much more likely that they will end up hitting you. Be thoughtful about the transition from vehicle to pedestrian.
Chris is very passionate about this aspect of riding a bike in traffic.
I kind of am.
Usually if there's no bike path available, we travel in the road with traffic. If possible, we try and ride the same speed as traffic, but that's not always possible.
Are you kidding? We're slow folks.
Side note, we tried riding on the wrong side of the road once because we thought maybe it would feel safer because we could see the cars coming, you know how you do when you're a pedestrian walking down the road. It was terrifying, and we will never do it again. And it actually makes you much less safe.
Lesson learned. If you're cycling somewhere that uses hand signals and you feel comfortable with that, use the hand signals. It's good to let drivers know what you're about to do. Not everywhere uses the same hand signals the same way. For example, while we were cycling in Turkey, we got a lot of weird looks when we were signaling what I thought was the universal turning to the right hand signal. Pay attention to what other cyclists are doing.
Also, newer riders might not be comfortable taking their hands off the handlebars, so that's fine too. Finally, ride in the furthest right-hand lane that is traveling in the direction that you're traveling in. Obviously, this is for countries where you drive in the right-hand side of the road. If you're driving in the left-hand side of the road, then it's the opposite. However, this doesn't always mean that you need to be as far right in the lane as you can be because of our next mistake.
Mistake number 4, failing to anticipate hazards.
Watch out.
One of the most common causes of bicycle collisions is the dreaded dooring. When cycling along a street with parallel parked cars, it's best to assume that every car has someone in the driver's seat and they're just about to get out.
It's a good idea to ride at least 3 feet from parallel parked cars if you can, even if it means that you're blocking the car behind you from passing.
But there are other hazards you have to anticipate too. Curbs and drains in bike lanes, potholes, roadkill, dogs.
The list goes on and on.
So always try to be aware of what's coming at you. Unless it's like a sprinkler when it's really hot, then you want to hit it, and it's so good.
And mistake number 5 is not wearing protective gear.
Some people argue that we should focus our efforts on creating safer cycling infrastructure and educating drivers rather than wearing helmets. While this is a good point, we do live in the world that we live in. Out there on the roads right now, you encounter all sorts of infrastructure and all sorts of drivers. So we choose to wear our helmets most of the time.
And then there's eye protection. Have you ever gotten a giant crack in your windshield just because a truck that was in front of you threw up a piece of gravel? If you don't wear eye protection, that could be your eyeball. So, wear glasses.
Kind of makes me cringe thinking about it.
Yeah. I don't love wearing sunglasses most of the time, but I did find a pair of clear UV protective glasses that I wear all the time now, and I love them.
Before we wrap up, we promised you a trick with a cheap children's toy that can help protect you from cars. And that's using a pool noodle sticking off of one side of your rear rack. Or while we were in Turkey and Sardinia, we actually used our click stands with a fluorescent yellow triangle hanging off of the end to encourage drivers to give us a little more space. It makes you easier to see, it makes you look like you take up more space for the cars that are passing you. And it actually really worked on some narrow roads without much of a shoulder.
Have you ever had a close call in traffic, or do you have any other tips or tricks that people should know about biking around cars? Let us know in the comments. And if you're looking for other ways to stay safe while biking, check out our video, How to Avoid Dog Attacks While Cycling. And until next time, happy trails!
I don't think I think it's part of your tooth. Are we saying it together?
No.
Is that what?
You want to try?
Sure.
Mistake number 1. Not planning your route. This comes off as really aggressive.
Be not aggressive. Make sure you. What do you do with your hands? Hide
I feel
them.
like you use them. You're supposed to use them.
I don't. Yeah, maybe. I do have hands. In
case you were wondering, he does have hands.
They come from anywhere.
I have 3 fingers.
Never know where they're gonna come from. Have you had any close calls?
Close calls with what?
Life and death, man. The fabric of the universe? The time knife? I don't know.
Chris saw the time knife.